Welcome to Getting Sketchy Live, brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. And now, let's get sketchy.
Hello there, everyone. Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and welcome to Getting Sketchy Live in 2023. So, first of all, Happy New Year to all of you guys, no matter where you are in the world. I hope that 2023 is a great and wonderful year for you. I'm personally happy to see 2022 go away, and I'm excited about 2023, and I hope you are too. Tonight is going to be our season finale show. So this is the 11th show in the 9th season, and in this episode, we are going to take a look at all the drawings that Ashley and I created this season, and we're going to do a quick critique on each one of these. Now, just because we're not creating a drawing tonight, don't go anywhere, because you are going to learn tons of stuff from just us analyzing the drawings that we created, kind of the things that went through our mind, and whether or not we think they were successful or not, or where we found some failure points, of course, and share those things with you. Ashley and I are also going to pick our favorites from the season, and I would encourage you to pick your favorites as well. And of course, you can chime in the chat box and let us know what your favorite is as well. You can also let us know wherever you are from wherever in the world you are located in the chat box as well. I'm going to be manning the chat box and running all this equipment tonight as well. So be patient with me. If you do have a comment or question tonight that's directed specifically at Ashley or I, if you put that in all capital letters, that'll help me see it a little bit easier among the chat box, because it does get rolling pretty quickly, of course. I see all of you guys here in the chat box. I see some familiar names and some new names, of course. So we're glad to have all of you. And Ashley sitting right over there, of course. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks for asking. I hope you all are doing well also and enjoying the first few days of the new year. Hope you're well rested. I'm not. I love the holidays, and I go to bed late and I get up early just to get as much of the holidays in as I can. So now that I'm back to work, hopefully I'll catch up on my sleep.
And for me, it's like the reverse of that. When the holidays come, my kids are at home all day, and it's hard for me to get work done. So when my kids go back to school, it's actually a little bit more peaceful than it normally is. And that's when I can get a little bit of rest, actually. But anyway, of course, this broadcast is about drawing specifically. And if you want to take your drawing and painting skills to another level, of course, I would strongly suggest that you check out the membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com. There are a variety of drawing and painting courses over there on tons of different subject matter and media. We also do weekly live lessons. So after this broadcast tonight, I'll be finishing up a live lesson series. We're working with oil pastels, and all of the live lessons are actually recorded and stored in our vault. So they go all the way back to 2012. So there are tons and tons of hours of video for you to watch, learn all kinds of things with all different types of media and materials. There's also weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute, the video I put out each week, and there is a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers as well. I call it the Ultimate Lesson Plan. All of that is included with your membership, of course, and everyone starts off with a week-long trial for free, so you can check out the program, see if it's right for you, and we also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee on top of that. So I don't think you'll be disappointed if you decide to go that route. I know a lot of you have made New Year's resolutions for 2023, myself included, and maybe one of those New Year's resolutions, my New Year's resolution is to enunciate. Maybe one of those New Year's resolutions is to dive a little bit deeper into your art making, and the membership program is an excellent place to do that. Plus, there is a great community of folks here. A lot of you are on the live chat right now. So grateful to have the virtualinstructor.com, and I hope that you'll take a look at it as well. Also, if you like this video, make sure that you like the video. And also, if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you're notified when we start season 10 of Getting Sketchy, and also when I post new videos here on YouTube as well. I think that's all I needed to say. Do you have anything else to say before we dive into these?
I don't believe so. I've been actually just taking a look at your fly on the screen and thinking about it, and the rest of the artworks they're going to critique in a little bit. So we can go ahead and get started with that one.
All right, so we're going to go through this in order, and I'm going to try to keep an eye on the time. I think the last season review we did, we were starting to run out of time at the end.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, we actually had 2 wheels this season. One wheel with the mediums that we were going to use, and another wheel with photo references that we chose. And we chose those photo references mostly with a medium in mind, and they didn't really match up with the mediums that the wheel chose for us, except for one, and that was really the chain.
Like the one we intended.
Right, the one we
really
intended.
hoped for. So it might be nice to say what we would have chosen for each subject if we didn't have that dastardly media wheel.
Right. So going into season 10, we're going to do something a little bit different. We haven't decided what we're going to do, but it's going to be a little bit different from season 9, just like every season is a little bit different. We might just go back to the old school way of doing things, but I feel like there needs to be a little bit of drama there.
We thought about, did we think about a dartboard with possibilities? And
maybe you thought of that.
I'm pretty good at darts.
Yeah.
So I think I could hit the media that I need to pull off my drawings. So dartboard, a bingo card, I don't know.
All these things are getting thrown at me right now. And we're going to do something, but we haven't decided yet. We'll probably start season 10 maybe a little bit later this month, if that's cool
Sounds
with you.
good.
So a few weeks off, and then we'll come back and continue with Getting Sketchy because you guys love it so much. In the meantime, I have a couple of videos to post here on YouTube. Mainly time lapses of some member content, some course video. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this critique of the artworks that we've done this season, and we're going to go in order. So the first drawing was on me, and I spun the fly and pastels. So this drawing was completed on pastel matte paper, which if you like pastels and you've never used pastel matte paper, boy, you're missing out. It is an unbelievable surface to work on. You can create smooth transitions of value and color relatively easily. And you can see the tooth of the paper doesn't really play too much of a role in the texture. It gives you those smooth transitions, but you can still create kind of the texture that you would on more heavily textured paper. But what I'm saying here is the texture of the paper doesn't really show through.
That's what's so unique.
The drawing.
It doesn't seem to have a visible tooth, but it has a really strong tooth to hold lots and lots of layers.
Yeah, it does have a strong tooth, and you can layer a lot of material on the surface for sure. So this was the first drawing I completed, and it's pretty static. It's pretty straightforward. It is a fly, and I'm not sure this fly is alive. I'm guessing the fly is no longer with us. But in this drawing, I tried to pull out a little bit more of the oranges and the blues that I kind of saw in the image. There are a couple of hints of purple here and there, but really I was trying to pull out a little bit of that complementary relationship of orange and blue. I was pretty happy with this one, especially it being the first one of the year, and I was happy that I landed on pastels for this one as well, because in my mind when I chose this reference, I kind of had pastels in my mind anyway. So I was pretty happy with this. Some of the things that I would change maybe if I had more time is just getting a little bit more refinement in some of the details, going in with more of the pastel pencils here and there, just to refine some of the details. But other than that, I was pretty happy with the overall finished product, especially for just 45 minutes.
Well, I appreciate how colorful the fly is, being a subject that, though it is colorful, it's so small we often can't appreciate those colors. So in that way, you have made something that typically isn't thought of as beautiful, borderline beautiful. And then, of course, the small marks that you put on near the end, like the hairs or fur of the fly, I know you said you'd like to have gotten more details in there, but just having some fine marks in there allow our imaginations to fill in some of the gaps where there could have been further exploration of detail.
All right, yeah, and that's kind of what I like to do. I like to take ugly insects and animals. They're not always ugly animals, and create them in a drawing or painting. And one of the courses Pencils on Polyester, which is about using colored pencils on polyester film, I drew a spider. And there have been several people who have told me that they can't do the drawing because it's a spider, which I think
it's not just a spider. It's a big, huge, hairy tarantula.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not a tarantula. It's a wolf spider.
Oh, it's a wolf. It's just so close.
Yeah, it's just zoomed in. It's like a portrait of a spider. It's real close in. There's lots of wonderful textures and
aren't
things.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're friendly. Just huge.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's a wolf spider. It might be a jumping spider or something. Anyway, I thought it was cool. But yeah, this fly I think is kind of in line with that. Anyway, I like doing this kind of stuff.
That's a classic theme in art, is trying to show the beauty in nature that sometimes is overlooked. I mean, takes us back into art history, that theme in art.
Let's see. I see the comment, love the subtle use of color in this one. My buddy says, Matt, LOL, I can't believe the fly's dead, but you reserved it or preserved it forever.
That's right.
Never get it how you make the call, just sketch it. Let's see. Colleen says, this fly was my favorite. Buddy says, but the spider has such great colors. Yeah, I agree. There's lots of oranges and greens in that spider. Okay, so that was the first one of the season. We're going to move on now to Ashley's drawing. This was a polar bear.
Yeah, so this was a polar bear on Canson Mitant's paper using pastel again. And I started out pretty far outside of my comfort zone working with wildlife. I actually had quite a few wildlife images to do. But I am happy and also unhappy about a few things in this artwork. So we'll go over those. I do like the colors in the bear that have colors other than like grays in the shadow. So pleased with that. I was pleased with the way the blue shadow looks below the bear. So as far as the use of elements of art, I don't have a problem with the way that I used color and shape. The background is pretty much abstract shapes. Matt and I did talk on the week that this one was completed about the possibility of leaving the background out. And I think that would have probably worked really well. Maybe had that diagonal edge that kind of cuts behind through the center of the bear, that lighter edge, and then sort of from the rocks up, just kind of leave it out. And I think that would have been okay. Maybe thrown a little bit more of the tension back onto the bear. Let's see. Also, I like the composition. This is one that Matt chose, and the bear being in motion. I think that's nice. Something that I would have done different if I were to do this one again is flip my paper over. I used the rougher side of the Mitant's paper, and I think given the size of the artwork and the medium, it may be, I don't know. I mean, it does have a lot of energy to it with how much tooth shows through all that broken color, revealing the color of the support. But I think I'd like to have seen just a little bit less of that. It had a little, maybe felt like there was more coverage outside of the areas of the bear with the amount of pastel that I was able to lay down in 45 minutes. So that was a change that I would have made, was the choice of paper, or really the side of the paper that I used.
Yeah, this was, like Ashley said, this was one of the references that I chose. And one of the things that I really liked about this this image was the diagonals that happen here. Nice. So there was the bear was at a diagonal, the shadow that's cast by the bear was at a diagonal. All of this information in the background was kind of at a diagonal too. So I kind of wanted to have an image that had that diagonal nature associated with it, and the bear was one of those. And something Ashley mentioned that we talked about after this was when we were picking out the photo references, we kind of had ideas in our mind of what the finished drawing would look like. I mean, you can't pick a photo reference without having a little bit of that idea in your mind. And in my mind, I kind of pictured the polar bear in like a field of snow. So that's one of the ways that it could be completed in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. But Ashley decided to fill in the whole background. I really like what's happening in the background, all those abstract shapes of color that he mentioned before. And it's always interesting to see, this season in particular, if we landed on one of the photo references that the other artist chose, how the artist that got that photo reference decided to, complete the drawing. So it's different. And if we assigned this photo reference to all of you guys, all of your drawings would be different too. So
That's right.
that's a really cool thing to see. And it
It's the
speaks
kind of
a lot
thing we
about.
see in the classroom all the time, but not everybody gets to do that. Especially when we're working on an exercise, and a lot of our students may be completing work from a similar or even the very same reference, but they really can't see what each other is doing until we're done. And that's what critiques are for.
Right. And this also gave us an opportunity to see us personally, what another artist would do when we have a vision in our mind and another artist takes that vision and does something completely different, which is cool. I really like the colors too. I just want to point out a few of the areas here. There's some blues on the nose. The grays here are almost reading kind of like a blue-green. And that's mainly because of the contrast of the yellows that are happening there and the purples that are happening in some of the snow areas. And I love the repetition of this blue and this blue and this blue. It's the same blue. It's just spread out, in different locations within the piece, and that gives it a little bit of continuity and a little bit of harmony and unity as well. And I agree. This is a small drawing. I can't remember exactly what the size is, but when you're working on a small drawing, with a heavily textured paper, it can be a little bit more challenging to execute some of the details and areas and stuff. So I think that kind of echoes what you were mentioning about using the smoother
that
side
was
of the paper.
stubbornness on my part, because I just prefer working on the rougher side of mi-teintes, given the option. But we are, in the studio, we have some limitations in size, and all of us have some sort of limitations in our artwork. Could be a material limitation or a support. In this case, it was size. And so I think a lesson for me is to not be quite so stubborn and rebellious, and maybe conform to my limitations a little bit, try to work inside of those. So I love thinking outside of the box and working outside of the box. But in this case, I think I was just a little stubborn, and I took my preferred side, but not necessarily the best in the circumstances.
All right. And June says, I loved this one. Sent it to my daughter who loves polar bears,
Great.
and now it's on her fridge. So,
I love that. Love hearing that. I do like how the bear's looking at us, breaking the fourth wall. Is that what they call that in movies, I think? So that's kind of, it's an engaging piece because of that. I mean, typically if you were to ever see a polar bear look at you, and so I would be, be filled with fear. So it gives us a nice, safe way to look a polar bear in the face.
All right, moving on. Mine was the next one of the season, and I drew markers / pen and ink for this one. And this was one of Ashley's photo references, and it's of a poppy flower.
That's right.
This one was a challenge to me because when I saw the image, I immediately thought, hey, what works well with this is it's got to be a colored medium. So, and it was markers and pen and ink. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, how can I combine pen and ink with markers in a little bit more of a creative way? So I decided to use watercolor markers. And watercolor markers are an interesting medium. I think that it's a great medium for when you need to sketch something out quickly, which is appropriate for Gettin Sketchy. The thing about watercolor markers that I've noticed is there are different ways you can apply the marker to the surface. One way is to take the brush and just lift off a little bit of the material and put it onto the surface. And another way is to take some of the marker and use it on like a plastic surface and then add water to it and then apply it. And in both of those ways, the application is very, very light. And the other way, of course, another way is to apply the marker directly to the surface and then activate it with water. And when you do that, the applications are very, very strong and intense. So there is a limitation to watercolor markers where there's not kind of a medium in between light applications or heavy applications. So for this, I decided to just use the marker and apply it straight to the surface and apply water. And it was a little bit hard to control, as you can see in some of the areas. And some of the areas, I got a little bit too dark, in my opinion, like down here and maybe down here as well. And maybe some of these areas in the background. Just the applications just were a little bit overwhelming. Because I was using watercolor markers and activating the markers after they were on the surface, I lost a little bit of some of these light areas that were kind of important to me when I was creating the image. Now that we're several weeks removed from this image, I like it a little bit more than I did initially, and that happens a lot with me with artworks. I'll finish a piece and not be totally happy with it, and a little bit of time has passed and I'm a little bit more happy with it. But I think that for me, I would have liked to maybe had a little bit more control with watercolor markers. And maybe if I was to do this over again, maybe instead of using the watercolor markers, maybe I would have just used alcohol-based markers. But I still like the combination of the looseness of the watercolor feel with the rigidness of the pen and ink. So I'm not going to totally apologize for that. But I do think that there are some areas where I could have used less of the material on the surface, of course. But that's kind of my take on this. I think I used hot press watercolor paper, if I remember correctly. And again, with those watercolor markers and the pen and ink. So what do you have to say?
Well, I think it's you didn't mention too much about the lines, and you focused mostly on your impression of the watercolor markers. I think that you did a great job with the contour lines and how they describe that subtle undulation of the petals. So that's a nice example for us to look at there. And I know that the watercolor markers, they have a mind of their own a little bit, like watercolor does as well, just traditional watercolor. Mm-hmm. But I feel like if we would have had a little bit more time, you could have worked a little bit slower in that darker area that's sort of near just below the center. I think you could have preserved some of those little lighter areas down there. Yeah. Had you had a little bit more time with the subject. But, we didn't. We don't have time for sometimes media to dry before we have to continue when we're working with something that is wet or semi-wet here on Gettin Sketchy. So I still think that the watercolor markers are or can be a good choice for this subject. It was just a little tight in the time constraint, and maybe the alcohol markers would have given you a little more control in that kind of an area. Or maybe you've used them in combination with each other, because I think the watercolor markers...
Yeah, but I couldn't. I had to use markers / pen and ink.
You couldn't have used the alcohol-based markers and the watercolor markers?
Oh, I guess I could have. I thought you meant watercolor, like actual watercolor.
Because maybe you could have used the alcohol markers there in the bulb in the center and still use the watercolor markers in the petals where that gradation I think is really effective.
Yeah, you're right. I wonder if there would be like a discrepancy in how it looked though.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. There'd been too much sort of a disconnection there. Possibly.
Maybe.
Well, in any case, it's a nice example of secondary colors working well together you do have some orange in there. There's a little bit. So it's a full secondary color scheme, but of course very much dominated by the purple and the green.
Yeah, this one wasn't my favorite one of the season. But anyway, I should remind you that if you missed any of these live broadcasts, you can where we're creating these drawings, you can go back and watch them. They're all on YouTube. So, when we're done here, if you want to go back and watch any of the videos, feel free to do so. All right, next we're going to talk about Ashley's parakeet.
All right, we'll talk about my least favorite drawing of the season for myself, and that was the parakeet. And at this point in the season, I wasn't feeling really great. I like the bear okay, and like Matt said before, sometimes your own artwork can grow on you over time, and I've come to appreciate the bear drawing more now than I did right when I had finished it. So I was on the fence about the bear drawing, and then I followed that up with this parakeet, and it's all right, but again, there's some choices. Again, the paper choices I feel started me off at a disadvantage here. So these are choices we make before we ever make our first mark. And in some way, those decisions are where a lot of the art lies. So I think it's worth talking about that. The parakeet has some very light areas. He's being hit hard by light from the left, along his breast, but also particularly in the head and in the feathers. And so a lot of the light up there is the white of the paper that is showing through this sort of the speckly quality of the colored pencils in this one. So had I had it to do over again, I think I would have chosen a toned paper, and that way I could have put down a light medium white colored pencil even, since had to be a colored pencil drawing. to create those values. And those create values would have been created intentionally and directly, not sort of indirectly by working darker areas around it. I think it would have been more effective that way. I think green paper would have been totally appropriate, and that would have given me a chance to work some in the background, but not have to work with as many colors or as many layers in the background, so that I could spend more time focused on the parakeet.
Yeah, and we're reminded that this is a cockatiel.
I'm sorry.
Not a parakeet.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Lisa tells us it's a cocktail.
I like cocktail better.
Yeah, you can drink it right up. Yeah, I'm just, I agree with the paper choice. I think that was something that we talked about afterwards.
Right.
That
Matt and I do a little critique afterwards a lot of times.
Yeah. And we can take it. We're used to critiques.
Well, that's how we grow.
Critical analysis of artworks. Yeah, I think if the paper was green, it would have given you also more time to work on the cockatiel. And it would have created actually a little bit more contrast between the cockatiel and the background, and probably made it stand out a little bit more. And you could also have used lighter colors here on the highlights. And that probably would have made it a little bit more representational too.
Yeah, I think so.
But we're under the gun. We're working fast and a time limit. And colored pencils, which is the medium Ashley used, is actually a slow medium. A lot of people think it's a quick medium, like a graphite pencil, which graphite drawings can be quick or slow. But with colored pencils, you really do have to slow down when you create a drawing, because that is the nature of the medium. It requires you to slow.
Layers. So if the artwork is 6 inches square, but you apply 4 layers everywhere, then it's like a 12-inch square paper. It's multiplied by like 400 times. So same size piece of paper, but often you have to cover or revisit the same areas over and over, different than with a graphite drawing. Yeah.
And especially when you're working with a colored medium and you're starting on a white surface, you really do have to do a lot of work to get some of those darker values in place, because you're starting at one end of the value scale and you're having to work your way basically to the other end of the value scale, and then have all those grays in between to create a full range of value. All right, so we'll move on to my next one, and that was the chain drawing. And this was one of the references that Ashley chose here, and this was one where the stars aligned and the medium matched the subject matter. So this was a black and white reference image. And it landed on charcoal, which is a good combination. And I chose to work on black paper with white charcoal. And it is a challenging combination of media to use a white material on a black surface. But the advantage is that it's pretty quick.
It's faster,
actually. You can develop a full range of value in a short period of time. Because you don't have to really worry about the blacks. You're just adding the light value. So it's the reverse of what we normally do when we're adding black or dark material to a white surface, where we're adding the shadows and dark values. We're adding instead the light values.
I don't know why it is, Matt, but when there's a lot of empty white paper, it feels unfinished. And when there's some empty black paper, it doesn't feel unfinished, because a lot of our world is like that. Things disappear in dark shadows, but very rarely do we see huge, expansive areas of pure white in our regular, daily life.
That's true, yes. Unless it's like an Apple commercial from the day. Remember that?
Everything white.
Anyway, I was fairly happy with the results of this drawing. I used a blending stump, of course, to create some of these smooth areas where we're seeing transitions of value in some of those grays. I used a white charcoal pencil for the rest. One of the things about using white charcoal on black paper is you do have to be a little bit tentative with your initial marks, because the white charcoal is compressed, which means that it's a little bit more difficult to erase. I also used an eraser in areas too, of course. So instead of using an eraser to erase out highlights, you're using the eraser to erase out shadows and darker values, which is kind of interesting. Again, that's the reverse of what we normally think. But that using the blending stump and the eraser, and of course, all that gives you a lot of control over the material, but you do have to be a little bit tentative in the beginning stages. I altered the reference photo just a little bit. The original photo had the chains in a straight vertical line. So I added a little bit of a diagonal to make the composition a little bit more interesting here. And I also faded out the bottom portion here and faded out the top portion there too, so that most of the high contrast was happening here closer to the middle of the picture plane. If I was to change some things a little bit, obviously, with more time, we could always add more details. There are a couple of areas where some of the edges and some of the contours are a little bit rough here and there. Sharpening those up would actually make the drawing look a little bit more realistic and a little bit more polished. There's a couple of areas where some of the white charcoal is getting a little bit loosey-goosey. So overall, the big thing that I would change about this one is just maybe some little craftsmanship things here and there, just to make the drawing feel a little bit more polished and finished.
You have enough variety in your marks inside of those shapes that are the chain links, that it kind of feels like those subtle divots and sort of beaten marks that you see sometimes in shiny or polished metal, and that gives it something of a feeling of details anyway. So that's something for you guys out there to sort of note, that the irregularity, the slight irregularity, and some of those strong, distinct marks that are very white on top of otherwise sort of light grays that feel like they're catching highlights from different directions. Matt got all that in pretty quick with his mark making and shading all at the same time. So I think that's one of the really positive qualities of this drawing, even if you feel like some of the edges are a little loose. Yeah,
the edges are a little bit loose, but what you mentioned about some of the imperfections in the chains, that kind of naturally happen. And obviously, I wasn't trying to copy every little imperfection that I saw. I just kind of got an idea of what the texture was happening, what was happening with the texture on each one of the chains, and then just try to replicate that in the drawing. So instead of actually mimicking what you see, you can kind of find the pattern or texture, that the pattern that is creating the illusion of texture on subjects, and then repeat that in a similar way on your subject. And that's a quick and easy way to kind of replicate texture. It's like an approximation of what you see. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the next one, which was Ashley's.
All right. So this was my third attempt at a creature, a wildlife, and this was a honeybee, and I was really happy with this one. Thank goodness after the cockatiel, I think I needed a confidence boost. So I went back to a place where I feel really comfortable, and that is with paint or wet media, and broke out some gouache.
We gotta preface this with the fact that for this one, Ashley had mixed media.
Yeah.
So he had a little bit of freedom to choose maybe some mediums that were outside of the realm of what we normally would use.
Yeah. And now this is a very fast dry media, which is why it is doable in a format like this, a 45-minute sketch. So this was a gouache painting. It was pretty small. I think it was 5 inches by 5 inches or so. And here I worked with ink and then worked with paint for a while, and then went back to ink. So having learned from the bear and the cockatiel, I chose to leave the background out of this one, something that we considered doing with the bear instead, and to really keep the emphasis and the focus on the honeybee itself. If the background I actually liked sort of the shapes and movements that were part of this image's background, but I think it really worked on that flat orange with all the texture and pattern that we see in both the bee and whatever that item is that the bee is standing on. And that is still
a mystery.
Yeah, that's still a mystery.
We kind of talked about it maybe being a bone or something, maybe a rib.
Yeah, it looks
Who
like
knows?
A bone
It's
me.
probably some kind of stick.
Yeah, probably so. Now, the composition's kind of static. It was not really about that, so we're just seeing the bee from a profile. It's not really, nothing's really moving towards us or away from us in space or anything like that. But it is all pretty well up close and in our face.
Now, for some reason in my mind, I'm thinking that when you did this, you were thinking about including the background and then chose not to.
I was thinking about it. Yeah, I had actually I actually worked out a sketch with the background in there.
That's
just kind
right.
of playing around with it.
Yeah.
And, there were two elements in the background, two shapes that compositionally kept us on the B, kind of led us down to the B. But there's not a lot of background. So I really don't know that was really necessary. It's not like we were going to lose the B in the composition anyway. There was some blue in the background, and I think that was what was attractive to me.
Well, I think the decision to leave those things out of the background was a wise one. Because, people were commenting about how the orange is so striking, and it really is. And it harmonizes the piece as well because the B is yellow. There are some orange bits on the B naturally. And you were able to use the color of the paper, which it's not really a good idea to show up here with a red marker, but you were able to use the color of the paper, which you can't even see that at all,
through the paint.
Right, to kind of accentuate the colors that are already there. So there are open spaces in the painting / drawing, but they make sense because of the overall nature of the subject. They even make sense on the bone or the stick or whatever that is.
Do.
The little pieces of orange.
It feels like light reflecting into the stick or bone from the B.
Yes.
Or from the background.
Yeah, well, even you see the segments. Segments of the B are open orange patches,
That's right.
and that works really well too. Because we need to see those segments, but normally those would be maybe dark. They're left open, and we can see the orange of the paper. So it really harmonizes everything, and I think it's a great combination of media. The little bone section there at the bottom, I'm calling it a bone.
Yeah, I think
I don't know what it is. The grayish areas are almost reading bluish because of the way they're contrasting against the orange. So I really like what's happening there. I guess there's a little bit of the body of the bee reflected. Down here.
That's right. That's right.
Which is kind of interesting too. That would kind of eliminate
down in there.
It being a stick. What
do you mean?
This thing.
It's a bone.
It's got to be something that's a little bit reflective, right? Got to be.
And I think that was in the image. I don't think I put that there.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure why you would put it there unless it was in the
I'm pretty sure I saw that
reference.
in the image, yeah.
Yeah. I really like this one. This is one of my favorite ones.
Anytime you see a color reflect into another object's color, it really makes those two objects or multiple objects feel like they're in the same space together. So even when you don't see an object's color reflected into another, sometimes just a really small amount of that shared color can contribute to cohesiveness.
Yeah,
between your individual elements.
And I'm willing to bet that your experience that you had with the cockatiel influenced you working on the orange paper.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I love this one. I love the way this one turned out.
So this is a result of some growth,
some learning and experience.
I learned something, right?
Yes.
Experiment, practice, and revise. And so this was a revision of what I would have done otherwise. That's right.
All right, and I guess that brought us to halfway through the season, and then it was my turn again, and the wheel again landed on me for pen and ink / markers.
That happened 4 times this season.
I know it happened a lot.
Yeah,
I think it was the weighted part of the wheel.
I think so.
just kidding. We didn't weight the wheel. So I had this airplane, which was one of the references that I chose. And it was actually a color image, but this time I chose to use just grayscale markers with the pen and ink. And for this one, I think I remember correctly, I worked on marker paper. So this one was a complex image because there was a lot of things that happened with the wings. And of course, getting the proportions correct on the plane is incredibly important.
Yeah,
so this was more of a mechanical, kind of get everything in the right place kind of drawing. So I spent a lot of time doing that in the early stages with a graphite pencil before switching over to the pen and ink. And then lastly, adding the markers in the closing minutes there. For the most part, I'm fairly happy with it. I kind of like the looser, sketchier lines that I've got here and there. If I was to do this drawing over, I probably would have accentuated those sketchier lines a little bit more. What I mean by that is allowed my marks to be even looser than they are now, which would give the drawing a little bit more movement. I feel like with a subject like this, you can get really super technical and have really, really strong lines that are really mechanical, or you can be loose. And I think my drawing's somewhere in between. So I'd kind of like it to be a little bit more rigid or a little bit looser. And I think for this subject and the fact that it was for Getting Sketchy, I kind of would have gone a little bit more looser with things, given this subject over again. I also could have done a little bit of hatching and cross hatching, again, given a little bit more time. But I was depending on the markers to get some of those values in place. And for most of the drawing, it kind of felt really incomplete until the closing minutes when I went back and it added a little bit of marker in the background. I think that little bit of gray made a big difference. It made the white parts of the airplane stand out. And then I went back with a little bit of gouache, I think, and hit some of these. Oh, no, it was a gel pen. Went back with a gel pen and hit some of those light areas, creating some of those rivets and things here and there.
Yeah, you could never work around rivets that small with markers that wide.
Right. No way. So I used alcohol-based Prismacolor markers for this. As I've kind of alluded to, I was fairly happy with it since I at least got the proportions correct. Again, it just kind of, what I would change about this is really the execution of the material, just loosening up actually with the pen and ink. And some of you are probably thinking you probably would prefer to see it a little bit more rigid, and that's fine too. That's another direction you could go. I could have made that top wing, underneath the top wing, a little bit darker, this area right here, since the light source is coming from above. There's not a whole lot of difference in the values here. And this bottom wing, I probably feel like it should be a little bit darker. But, I don't have the reference in front of me, so I'm kind of making judgments based on what I'm looking at in a drawing. And maybe these wings were light. Maybe they were white with the body of the plane. So you might lose them if I would have made them darker. But just kind of looking at it here, removed from everything, and not looking at it. Looking at it for the first time since we did the drawing, that's just kind of my snap judgment. And you can see I also apparently did some things before the ink was dry, because I'm getting a little bit.
I wanted to talk about that.
Getting a little bit of sway there.
The way that smeared creates motion or movement, but in the wrong direction. It looks like the plane is moving backwards when I look at that wheel. I wish it would have just smeared in the opposite direction.
Smear the other way.
It would have been perfect. It would have worked really well. So that's great. But you can kind of
just don't look at it. Don't look at it.
Now, something that I really like you did that I would have done, might have chosen to do differently to a fault, would be to shade in a more of a cross contour fashion. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I have something that's longer, like cylindrical, I like to shade around the body, to show the roundness. But here, working with your markers in these long strokes that follow sort of the shape of the plane, I think that's appropriate for a plane, for something that's in motion. I think it contributes to the feeling of movement and emotion in a direction. So, and in this case, I think that was, and also the reflective qualities of the top half of the fuselage and the front of the plane, that wouldn't have worked as well if I had done this and would have worked in more of a cross contour fashion. Yeah, sure, I might have shown the roundness of the plane, but the reflectivity might not have worked, especially in such a fast execution.
Well, I like to teach people that cross contour lines go this way, but they also go this way.
They can.
So you can kind of think of it as like a grid.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, a lot of the highlights and shadows were linear.
Yeah.
So if I did do that, if I did apply the material this way, I would probably have some inconsistencies where I'd come up with the marker too high or too low or whatever. And you can really see that happening here. So that's why I decided to go that direction. But the reason why I'm pointing that out is because I know a lot of people struggle with cross contour lines. I know that from comments people make in the courses where we talk about cross contour lines. It can be confusing at the beginning because, some cross contour lines are visible and most of them are invisible. So you have to think about the form of the subject in order to find the cross contour lines. And cross contour lines are so important because they can help us determine which direction to make strokes, like Ashley pointed out. They can go this way or this way in this particular case. It wouldn't make sense, of course, to fill in the values going like this.
At all.
Right. That would not complement the form of the subject. So that's why cross contour lines are important, whether you're making brush strokes or pencil strokes or marker strokes. All right. Let's see. The next one is Ashley's, and that was the cafe.
The cafe. That's right.
Again, markers and pen and ink.
Yeah, they showed up more and more in the second half of the season. So maybe we should have done the whole season with markers and pen and ink and just gotten rid of that wheel altogether. But this was one of Matt's selections. Again, it does have strong diagonals that kind of take us back in space. So that's something nice just about the composition itself. The colors are complementary-ish. You know, we've got blue, green, and I wouldn't say really a red orange in there, but there's blue and there's also blue, and there's an orange, and there's red. You could argue that there's red, that's a dark red orange maybe there in the chair or on the ground that have a complementary relationship with the wall, the blue-green wall. And regardless, there's a big difference between the warm and the cool colors in this piece. Also, pretty nice, strong shadow, which I think adds a lot. This is a pretty, it's just a wall, right? It's something that's kind of flat. So having the shadow that reaches down, across the top third of the composition breaks up that really big space that would have been more of a flat, uniform color. Some things I did in this piece was that might be different. I don't know, different than the way some people work with markers and ink, is I started with just markers and had no ink drawing to begin with. Well, I started with a pencil, and then we lightened our drawing up, I believe, and then went in with the markers. So the drawing felt a little bit flimsy all the way through because that structure that the dark black lines can provide wasn't there, but we knew it was coming, so we just kept working with the markers until our space was pretty filled, knowing that the black lines would clarify in areas, and I feel like that's what they did. The reason I didn't want to start with the lines, the black lines, is because I only wanted to use as much as I needed to redefine or define some structure and clarity only where the markers were sort of falling down a little bit, or maybe just weren't doing a good enough a job in terms of contrast. When we work with markers, sometimes we're limited, to the values that those markers make. And so contrast, you can have too much contrast because your markers natural values are too far apart or too little. And so I didn't really use the pen a lot, but I think it was effective where I did use it, and it's very broken. I don't have a whole lot of connected outlines around entire shapes. I love, when I looked at it today, I just loved the way the chairs were and how loose the chairs were. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of marks in there that that have ends that don't connect on either end to anything, and but if they're in close to the right place, then we can let our audience kind of fill in those gaps. So I felt pretty good about this one when I finished it. Gave me positive vibes.
Yeah, and I mentioned when you did this one that it reminded me of Van Gogh, and even somebody just said a minute ago, Van Gogh-ish. Mm-hmm. Dale says, love the blood on the bar floor. Just kidding. But yeah, your eyes are drawn to that red down there because that's really the only location where we see it in the piece. I do like you mentioned, the chairs. There's just enough information in the chairs for us to know that they're chairs. And I really like seeing that because, there's no doubt that those are chairs. But when you, on closer inspection, if you really start to evaluate them, you see that there's a lot of information missing, but it's just enough information that's there. And I also really like the shadows, the choice to use the purple back here for the shadows. That really contrasted, like you said, against the warmer colors. And that we have a little bit of that purple here too, a little bit of that purple there too. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of echo. There's a touch of purple in that lamp and that purple there as well. And the shadows right here are extremely important in this piece. You can imagine if those shadows weren't there, not only we'd still have a pretty defined light source, but those shadows add a little bit of a dynamic quality to the piece.
I think I almost forgot those shadows. I think I put them in at the very end.
Yeah, I think the shadows are pretty critical.
Very much so.
Another thing that's really critical, I think, is the three-dimensional quality of the sun here.
Yeah.
There's just a little bit of information there, but
That's a place where the value of the shadow and the value of the sign were too close together, and it needed some line work over there.
Well, the sign I feel like is important. It's given us information about the light, of course, and I like the way that you handled the windows, the glass in the window, without adding those more horizontal lines there. You've got just enough information there vertically. Again, this is a wonderful sketch, but it does have that painterly feel about it. And I think that the reason why is, boils down to your use of color. The colors are very similar to what we would see in some Van Gogh paintings, where they're a little bit brighter than what we would expect in reality. But they're also unique color combinations. And the sign really stands out. The sign above the door also stands out because we don't really see that brown anywhere else except, well, there's a couple areas, but that brown up there stands out really nicely against the blue-green at the top there. So, I really like this one as well. And
I think I might use this process more. It's the first time I've actually made a drawing with marker and ink where I started with no ink at all. And I was hoping that, my ink work or marker work wouldn't fit in the lines entirely. I have a problem, if the lines are too strong, I'm going to fill them in and I'm going to kind of be accurate. And I wanted to my markers to be inside and outside of those lines a little bit. And so I thought if I started without the markers, that would sort of happen by default. And it did, for me. The edge of the markers, the marker edges and the black lines don't always match up perfectly. And I think that's cool.
All right. Well, my last drawing of the season was the acorn. And there's a little bit of a story behind this one because the photo reference of the acorns that Ashley provided, I did not like at all.
It was horrible.
Well, it's good. I'm glad that you're admitting that it was a horrible reference. So I decided to take the acorn concept and instead, do my own acorn. And this is actually a photo reference that I used in the course Subjects with Pen and Ink. So I did this acorn in pen and ink, but it was oriented the other direction, so it's a little bit different. But I, again, landed on charcoal. So I had like pen and ink and markers a couple times, and charcoal a couple times, and pastels only once. And pastels and colored pencils are really my favorite mediums to work with. So there was a challenge there for sure. This whole season was super challenging for both Ashley and I. And then we have to go on live and execute these drawings. So, but it's all entertaining, of course. And it's a learning experience for you guys and for us as well. But anyway, I used white charcoal and, of course, traditional black charcoal on gray paper for this one. And I think I worked on Strathmore gray tone paper for this. So there's nothing real fancy about the paper. It's a pretty smooth surface. But of course, I used blending stumps as well to create a little bit more of a smoother transition. But, as you can see, again, a very static composition. It's acorn. Here is acorn right in front of you. And for these little Gettin Sketchy exercises, drawings like that work really well, I feel like. Compositions like this also work really well for instructional videos because, it's all about the process and not necessarily about the artifact that's created. So there's nothing really fancy to talk about with the composition here, except that this is a good example of balancing positive and negative space. But I enjoyed creating this drawing. This is another good example of the importance of cross contour lines because in this particular case, we can see them. This is one of those subjects where, I tell students that cross contour lines most of the time are imaginary lines, but on some subjects you can see them, and you can see these lines that exist in the meat part of the acorn. I have no idea what that thing's called, and you can see it's different than the textured part of the acorn, the cap, I guess. So anyway, those cross contour lines contribute not only to the texture, but also to the illusion of form as well. If I was to do this one over, I think the glaring issue with this one is the composition's pretty boring. But as I mentioned before, what we're doing here is not really all about composition. But I think I would have continued to add more detail. I know that sounds kind of like a cop out maybe, but again, I'm looking at this critically. If I was doing this drawing as a finished piece, I would have been worked a little bit slower and developed a little bit more of the details. There's enough information here so we know it's an acorn. We have an idea of where the light source is. We have a good impression of the form of the subject. But beyond that, some of the detail is missing. You can see on the body of the acorn here, I started to add some of those details.
There's
at the
little
very
scratches
end.
in there, right?
Yeah, little
point
scratches.
That out. You don't have to have every detail for it to feel like it's detailed.
Right.
You address some of those with those small marks, and also those tiny white marks in the pattern of the cap. Those little reflections there, sort of in the middle of the cap. That's enough to make me feel like you're observing those details.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was definitely observing them.
It feels like a detailed artwork just because of those. Even though I'm sure there was, if we were to go back and look at the reference again, we could point out more and smaller marks that are probably missing.
Yeah, and I just want to. The last thing I want to point out about this drawing is if you're struggling with value is the darkness or lightness of a color, and it's the most important element of art because it influences texture and form. It even influences the illusion of space within a drawing. So value has influence over at least 3 other elements of art. And there's only 7 elements of art. So that tells you how important value is. But if you're struggling with value and you've only been working with graphite, pencil drawings, or pen and ink, then I would encourage you to get some gray paper and grab some white charcoal and dark charcoal and work with that, because you will be forced to create a full range of value if you do. If you've never worked with charcoal, that's fine. But working on a gray surface will actually start you in the middle of the value scale. And as you add light values and dark values, you're actually pushing the range of value naturally. Some folks have difficulty making drawings darker or dark enough. Some people make their drawings too dark and they need a little bit of work making their drawings lighter. But if you're struggling with that, working on gray paper with a light and dark medium will definitely help you get a more full range of value. Anything else you want to say about this one, Dan?
I don't think so. I think that's really great advice, though, to start on gray paper, because you're going to end up with a full range of value no matter what. While you were talking about it, I was thinking of how many drawings I see that really, on white paper with graphite, only work their way down to about a midtone, and those midtones act as the shadows. So if you start with gray, you're going to have to get darker than that. You put it in the background kind of near the end. It's a little bit like the fly drawing. You kind of bookended your season with a nice heavy white background of strokes, and I think it works for this one.
I like adding white backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, when you add white to the background, it's interesting to look at. When it's just white because it's been left undone, there's no interest in it.
Right. It's because there's subtle.
We can see Matt's marks in there.
Yeah, there's subtle marks in there. Yeah. That's the thing. It makes the drawing feel finished because everything has a stroke.
It's been addressed. That's right.
Yeah. So. In a little trick there too as well. If I did this drawing on white paper, of course, it would have been very difficult for me to get this range of value in 45 minutes, honestly. And it wouldn't have been as interesting on a white sheet of paper. It just wouldn't have been. So, and yes, I agree. Addressing some of the comments that I'm seeing popping up here is, I did use white charcoal with this. This is white and dark charcoal on gray paper. You can see some of the gray paper popping through a little bit on the meat part of the acorn. All right. And then the last drawing of the season was on you, and big surprise, pen and ink and markers.
That's right. It's the 4th iteration of pen and ink and markers for the 9th season. So this was a selection that Matt made. It was probably
I literally made it.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You did.
Yeah.
You crafted this one from almost nothing.
No, there was. I started with the pineapple.
But he added the background and all of that kind of stuff in. Now, this one was a little unusual because it's such a tall composition compared to what we a lot of times do on Gettin Sketchy, just because your screens and our screens are oriented in. Well, actually, we usually do verticals, but just not this tall or not this wide. But it's perfect for the subject. So this piece is a really great example of approximate symmetry. It's almost perfect symmetry, but it's an organic subject, so it's not exactly the same on both sides. So it's real strong on the principle of art balance. The real strong in the element of art color. In fact, I'd say the only color not here is violet or purple. So it almost crosses the entire spectrum, and I almost make an argument the red in the background is a red violet. So pretty broad in terms of color. Again, I think I started. Sure, I know we made a pencil drawing. I think I had. Can you remember if I started with ink before marker? I think
you did the ink. I think before the marker.
In this case, I put some ink down first, just because I was worried about losing the tips of the pineapple. So we started with a little bit of ink and then went with the marker, but it wasn't very heavily outlined because, again, I didn't want to feel like I was filling in shapes necessarily. So a lot of the edges of the pineapple itself don't have a sort of a connected line around it. Used some hatching in the top, I guess in the foliage of our pineapple. And late in the drawing, I started to feel like there was not enough harmony between the top half and the bottom half. So I went ahead and used the markers, the thinner tip of the marker, and went ahead and did a little bit of line work, a little bit of the different directional hatching in the meat of the pineapple, where the pattern of the pineapple is. And I felt like that went ahead and introduced the harmony that was needed between the top half and the bottom half. A lot of energy in this piece, and because of sort of the irregular edges and quality around the foliage, where sometimes there's a gap between two colors and sometimes two colors overlap to make a darker mark, I went ahead and finished the composition around the edges slightly irregular also. I feel like that irregular edge to the red and yellow kind of matched the bumpy edge of the pineapple. So that was supposed to be sort of an echo in terms of that contour. And I feel like that works. I'm okay with that. It's something that I don't usually do in my own drawings. So the big takeaway here, I guess, color, pattern, and line were the elements that dominated, and then the strongest principle of art that we can see going on here is, of course, balance.
Now, of course, I chose this reference with oil pastels in mind.
Yeah, it would have been great for that. It would have been great for oil pastel.
And I created the image using a pineapple and then enhancing the colors, and then I played around with the background. So there's some questions about the background here, and I just want to scroll back here a little bit and answer a couple questions. First of all, Buddy says, is there any toned, heavy drawing paper out there for colored pencils? And someone already made a good suggestion, and that is pastel matte paper. Well, that was the same paper that I used to draw the fly. That is super heavy. That will eat up your colored pencils, but it is a heavier paper. And also there's Canson-Mitant's pastel paper that is great for colored pencils as well. That also has a heavy tooth on it, and it comes in a variety of different colors, just like pastel matte paper. So both of those are a good option. And also the paper that I used for the acorn drawing, that's also a good surface for colored pencils. You are limited in the amount of layers that you can apply with that paper, and that is Strathmore 400 series toned gray paper, I think, if I remember correctly. Now, people were asking, Edie says, first of all, that would make a great label for a pineapple flavored beverage, and I agree. And Buddy says, would the background have worked if you had chosen a dark bottom along with a light wall? And yes, it would, and no, it wouldn't, because if the way Ashley rendered this, it wouldn't have worked, because he made the plumage at the top kind of lighter than what it was in the reference. And the background was as dark as it is in the reference, maybe a little bit lighter. But you've got to have contrast between what's in the foreground and what's in the background if you don't want to lose what's in the foreground. So there needs to be contrast there. And in the original image or the photo reference, the plumage was a little bit darker than that, but enough to contrast the background. So if you went with a lighter background, trust me, I tried. I played around with Photoshop. I had like 7 or 8 different versions of this. I moved the level where, the line where the background and the foreground, or the table and the background meet. I moved it up and down in different places. I played around with different colors, lights and darks, and switched them. And honestly, the photo reference that I came up with was the best of the 8 or so that I created. So those are great questions, and those are always answered through experimentation in your own art. And we do the same thing when we're creating art. You know, I bring stuff into Photoshop and play around with it all the time. Let's see if we're up to date with that. All right. Okay, so we're now ready to choose our favorite drawing that we did, and then the favorite drawing that the other artist did. So, do you want to go first? Or
yeah, sure. I'll start.
Have you already got your favorite in mind?
I do. I do, for both of us. And for myself, it was actually a little bit of a tough call between the bee and the pineapple, and really enjoyed doing the pineapple, but I chose the bee.
The bee,
the bee. And I think I chose the bee because of the bone.
Right.
I just love that. I just love that bone the bee's sitting on. All those
Ashley doesn't eat meat, but he sure likes the bone in his drawing. And okay, that's great. And those of you in the chat box, please tell us which one you like the best from Ashley and I's drawings.
Yeah, and my drawings again were the bee, the pineapple, the cafe, the bear, and the cockatiel.
Yeah, so we'll go through Ashley's again. It was the bear, the bird, the bee, all bees.
Right.
The cafe, the buffet.
We're
gonna call it a buffet.
Okay, we'll call it a buffet.
So it still has a bee sound.
It's a bistro.
And the pineapple. And mine's were the fly, the poppy flower, the chain, the plane. At least that rhymes. And the acorn.
And the acorn.
Okay. All right. So people are casting their votes. We've got a lot of cafe, a lot of chains, the bee and the fly, the chain, the bee and the cafe and the chain, the bee, the chains.
We're hearing a lot of
cafe.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So your favorite.
I like the cafe a lot too.
Was the bee?
Yes.
Okay. What was your favorite of mine?
It was the chains. The chains are powerful.
The chains are powerful chains.
As sort of a symbol, and then also in just the high contrast nature of the medium. It's a favorite of mine. White on black. Any sort of black surface I'm drawn to as far as art making. So painting on a black surface, drawing on a black surface, scratch board is also great. So but it's not because I'm partial to that. I think it's a strong piece. It was a really strong drawing, and I really like the decisions that Matt made. Some of the decisions that he made before he even started, like fading out those chains as they start to reach the edge of the picture.
Well, thanks. That is called bending the rules. What's shocking to me is that there are several people saying the poppy was their favorite.
Yeah.
And that was definitely my least favorite. But that's fun. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So my favorite was, it's so hard. But for me, it came down to the fly or the chain. And I think the fly is my favorite because it's more true to who I am as an artist. I love working with pastels. This is kind of more in line with what I like my personal style to be. But I do enjoy working with white charcoal on black paper. I just finished a white charcoal portrait on black paper, and that is a lot of fun. So the chains are definitely a second favorite of mine. For yours, what do you think I'm going to pick?
The cafe?
No.
Okay.
Which one is it? It's the bee.
The bee.
Yeah, I think the bee is
we're in agreement.
Pretty awesome. I love the orange. The orange just pops, and I love the little specks of the orange showing through the paper. And I love the way you handle the gouache as a medium too.
We both got to do a winged creature facing the left.
Yes. And look, they were both our favorites.
Yeah, that's right. We both picked our winged creature facing the left as our favorite.
Isn't that weird and crazy?
I think my bee killed your fly.
Okay.
My bee's still alive.
My fly is definitely dead. But he is colorful in his death. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So that's gonna that's going to wrap up season 9 here. And I'm so grateful for all of you guys joining us tonight to talk about these drawings. We're going to start season 10 in a few weeks' time. So if you want to be notified, there are a couple ways you're going to be notified when we start season 10. One way, of course, is to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure YouTube sends out an email if you're subscribed every time we go live. So that might be kind of late notice. But we do have a newsletter at thevirtualinstructor.com. And to get on that list, there's actually a link in the description below this video. It says you can check out 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free. And if you do check out 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free, that will also put you on the newsletter list. And I will send out an email when we will start the next season. And the next newsletter is due to come out pretty soon. It's been a while since we've sent out a newsletter, but that newsletter will have all of the links to season 9 Gettin Sketchy episodes, as well as the new content that I've added for members on the site, which are primarily additions to the charcoal drawing course and also members minute episodes. So guys, thanks for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed this look back. I hope you enjoyed season 9. Well, we definitely enjoyed it. It was adventurous, to say the least. We challenged ourselves quite a bit, and we have learned that moving forward, we're not going to challenge ourselves that much. I'm just kidding. We're still gonna give ourselves challenges, but dealing with the photo references and having something in mind with the medium that came up was definitely a true challenge. Ashley, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you guys for being here all through the season. I look forward to being back with you in just a few weeks. And yeah, what Matt said, I think I'd like to have just I like the challenges, but I also like the choices too. So maybe we'll find a happy compromise between challenge and choice in the next season.
Yes, for sure. So we're getting ready to go live over at thevirtualinstructor.com.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
To finish up the series that I'm working on with oil pastels, and I'm ready to complete this drawing tonight. We're going to be working on the reflections. And since tonight is the last lesson in this series, we'll go until we're finished. So it may be an hour, maybe less than an hour, maybe more than an hour. And I know I'm going to see a lot of you guys over there who are in the chat box right now. So we'll see those of you who are joining us over there in just a few minutes. For the rest of you, I guess we'll see you next. Well, won't be next week. It'll be in a few weeks. Yeah, we'll see you next season. All right. Thanks again for joining us. Good night, everybody.